Obviously, you're so well known in the industry as being this great educator and academic in franchising and somebody so with a unique background. I didn't know anything about how you started in franchising. I knew nothing about the automotive side of the business and how you really got started. You are like all the rest of us when it comes to franchising, is that franchising found us, right? That's the phrase we hear all the time. Nobody looks to franchise, get involved in the industry, at least way back when.
No, more so now, you've got students at Palm Beach Atlantic in the franchise program they have, and they're coming out. Several of their graduates have come out buying franchises,
Right.
and working in the franchise industry. So it's becoming much more mainstream. Back in late 80s, early 90s, it was the wild, wild west in many cases. So franchisees couldn't go to the convention. I mean, it was not the most inclusive group that I was ever involved with, but wow, it's really changed. I'm just so proud to be involved in franchising because it is one of the most diverse business models on the planet. And it really has opened a lot of doors for business ownership that just weren't there. And so really exciting to see how it's evolved, especially over the last 15 years.
Aside from, of course, there's so much development in technology and resources, but besides that, has franchising changed a whole lot from 1987 to 2023?
Well, that's a very great question, interesting question, a lot to say there. But what I would say on one side is the principles that underpin the franchise model have not changed. The keys to using the franchise model successfully have not changed. Franchising's application has developed in an amazing way with a wide variety of sectors getting engaged. I mean, back when the early, the 80s and 90s, it was dominated by food service, right? And it was really thought of, if you're not in the hotel business or the food service business, franchising is kind of this rinky-dink little thing, and it really has evolved very nicely to aggregate disaggregated markets. For example, Don Dwyer in the home services, right? I don't know if you know the Seinfeld episode about I got a guy, right? You have to, my window's not working, but I got a guy, I'm not going to let you use my guy because I don't want you to mess up my access to the guy. And so everybody has to have a guy locally, but then all of a sudden we start seeing brands evolve that people can begin to trust in home services to say, hey, I don't have to find a guy, a man in a truck out here running around. It reminds me of the company that I got involved with about 7 years ago. 4 founders started a company called Zero Res. It was a carpet cleaning franchise or company that they started franchising, and they really ran into problems very early with their franchise model, their relationship with their franchisees, the way they really didn't understand the franchise model. And so they were trying to follow kind of what they saw out in the marketplace. And it was really going badly. I remember I spoke in Salt Lake City at it was a law firm that had a luncheon. And so they invited me to come in and speak on franchising, and their office was just overrun. It was like over 100 people show up, and there's people looking through glass cubicles, to see and hear. And these guys were in the audience, and they came up afterward, and they're like, "Man, you really love the franchise model, but we hate it. It is like been painful. It's not working." And I was like, "Well, what business are you in?" And they're like, "Carpet cleaning." And I immediately thought to myself, I can't think of anything less sexy than carpet clean. Do I really want to get involved in a carpet? But it was really fascinating because I thought, it doesn't matter if it's carpet cleaning. It doesn't matter if it's, the principles are there. Let me find out what's going on. So I worked with them and revamped their model, what they were offering, and shifted their mindset around relationship building with your franchise partners who are building your brand locally. And, the company was sold last year with sales of over 150 million. It's the second largest in the country behind Stanley Steamer, I think, at this point. Just went on a massive journey of incredible growth, incredible. And it's a carpet cleaning company.
Right.
And so I think to answer your question, what makes using the franchise model successful is still there.
Mm-hmm.
The principles that underpin it, that revolve around training franchisees, that revolve around how you support franchisees, that evolve around the role of the franchisor. I share this, image of a sailing ship, right? The franchisor is in the crow's nest. Okay. The franchisees are down on the deck, and imagine that they're rowing, right? They're actually executing the model. And when the franchisees try to climb up in the crow's nest, things go terribly wrong. When the franchisor comes down on the deck, things can go terribly wrong. But that vision, that perspective the franchisor has of where we're going, how we're going to get there, those are really important. But how do you communicate that down to the deck? Right. So communication is such a key pillar. And then the final thing I would say is that most people think of the franchise journey as a linear equation, and it's the absolute opposite. The final outcome of it can be a linear equation at scale, but when you're an emerging franchise brand, the rules of engagement are completely different than when you're rapidly growing. And when you're rapidly growing, the rules of engagement are completely different than when you make it to scale and maturity. And so many people look at the mature brands and they try to be an emerging franchisor like the emerging brand in the way they operate, the way they communicate, the way they interact with the market. And they fail. They run into problems. How you operate an emerging brand using the franchise model is vastly different. And so when I developed the curriculum for the Lineker Center, I did it on the stages in franchising, the early stage. And we just dive into that from the franchisor and the franchisee perspective. And then we get into the growth stage and then the maturity. And then you either decline or you grow again. And so by looking at it in those stages, I think it's a really powerful way to understand how to deploy the model most effectively. It's a dynamic model that's constantly in need of change and adjustment. But if we treat it like a linear equation, things tend to go wrong very quickly.
Right. Oh, yeah. And the franchise founder or whoever the leader is going to have to adapt, like you're saying, at the different stage that their franchise company is in. You're in a totally different mindset when you're at zero franchises trying to get to your first 10. That's one of the most common questions I get is, Frank, how do I sell my first 10? How do I get my first 12? How do I do that?
Yeah. No, I do this regularly. Matter of fact, just launched a pickleball concept, and we literally had our FDDs ready to go on September 3rd. We've signed 5 regional developers and have 65 units in development. And what are we, 6 weeks in, 7 weeks in? So wow. Part of the answer to that is, if you're going to use the franchise model, you don't decide today you're going to use it and start selling franchises. When I franchise a concept through Franchise Well, it's 4 to 6 months before we ever look the first candidate in the eye. You've got to build all the infrastructure needed to support every franchisee. The first franchisee deserves the same thing the 100th franchisee deserves. And so all of that learning management systems, technology platforms, marketing portals and systems, all of that has to be ready and done and documented for that first franchisee. So one, if you don't take the time to do it right and build all that, those first few franchises might be harder to sell because they see you're not ready, right? You're not ready to support them. Secondly, during that phase, when you're building all that, you should be courting your first franchisees. I like to say you should be signing your first franchise agreements 14 days after your FDD is ready, because you should have been cultivating those early adopters while you're building the franchise model. They might be family. They might be friends. They might be customers who said, hey, is this a franchise concept? Who knows? But you should be cultivating those relationships and those early stage franchisees while you're building it, so that you come out of the box with momentum, with people signing, people coming on the system. And then that leads into what I think is the most effective way is PR. And I've worked with most of the PR firms that are out there. I helped launch one into the franchise community, and you know who you are. But I believe that the founder is the story, right? There are some manufactured concepts coming into franchising. Some people with money go into a lab, they design it for the purpose of selling franchises and making money. I call that a manufactured concept, and they're out there. What I like are somebody who's actually an entrepreneur who builds a concept and is successful. That's a story. You want to get that out. So I find that early stage PR is very important. And then the third is stay close to home. I ran into a guy last year. He'd spent $250,000 and a year with consultants. They registered in every state. They had all this money spent and all this work. And he said, it's been a year. We haven't sold a unit. And so I asked him, where are you located? He told me. I said, wow, that's a pretty good sized town. How many more of your concept could fit in your town? He said, I've looked at other locations and stuff, but we should have 6 in the town I'm in. I thought, why didn't you start by putting 5 more right there where they could see it, touch it, feel? Why were you trying to go across the country and launch? So early stage, take the time to build the infrastructure right so that that first franchisee gets 100% of the value proposition. Secondly, can cultivate those early adopters to go on this journey with you so that they're ready to go right when you launch. And then thirdly, tell your story, use PR, but keep it in the city you're in or the surrounding cities, but keep it close to home so you don't have to pack a lunch and fly to Hoboken to try and get a franchisee on board. Much better if they can just see it, touch it, feel it, and you can influence them.
With that said, what's your opinion on the amount of company-owned locations you like a client to have, or you suggest an early franchisor have before they franchise their concept?
Yeah, you know, the school of thought on that has changed over time. Used to be you would be very well established as a brand and a company before you ever thought of, rolling out franchising. It was really kind of almost frowned upon if you started franchising too early. It's like you can't have enough knowledge, you can't have enough, ability, right? How can you possibly be franchising? Nobody knows your brand. And yet today, there are any number of examples out there of having no company-owned units and growing. I mean, Success Space, which is owned by Success Enterprises, success.com.
Okay.
It's a co-work concept. They have no franchise. They have they have no company owned. Their very first proof of concept is a franchisee opening later this week in Flower Mound, Texas, right? And so it's come all the way 360 to where you can literally build a concept and roll it out only through franchisees, no company-owned units. To do that, though, you've got to create the incentives for somebody to want to be those early stage adopters in a model like that. But from a kind of the continuum of I got none, I got a whole bunch, it really depends on the industry you're in. If you're in an industry that's highly competitive, you're going to think about that very differently than one that's an emerging, right? So as I mentioned, pickleball, right? And so pickleball is going crazy right now.
Right.
It just, the founder of Dill Dinkers, the concept we just rolled out, he's opened and operating 4 units in the last year, right? So we were able to see the proof of concept in finding a location, getting it open, selling memberships, getting members in, holding events. So the full cycle now has evolved through these 3 locations to where when we rolled out September 1st, our first discovery day, we had 18 people fly in, boom, in a facility playing pickleball.
Nice.
Touch it, feel it, taste it, left, 2 people signed the next, 2 weeks later, right? And then we had our second one. And then Sunday and Monday, we just had our third one. We had 30 people at Discovery Day. So what I'm saying is early stage with just 4 locations, it's an emerging market with people already out there and we're ready to go, right? If you're in a highly competitive market where there's lots of people out there, you might have to build your model a little longer, a little deeper in order to get that foundation to take franchising and use it effectively, moving it out from wherever you're located.
Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.